I caught my wife cheating, and what I learned shocked me. Not only had she been unfaithful, but she was pregnant. The worst part? I wasn't the father. I was devastated, but I decided not to forgive her. This wasn't just revenge. It was my cold, calculated payback. Everything that happened afterward turned my life upside down. Want to know how I decided to handle it? Listen to the end. Christian stood in front of the salon where Katie worked. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd never been the jealous type, never checked her phone, never followed her around. But this time, something made him stop just outside the door, a weight in his chest. He just wanted to look, to see her at work, to make sure everything was normal. But it wasn't. Through the glass doors, he saw her laughing. Not just smiling politely, but laughing, genuinely, openly, in a way she hadn't with him in ages. And sitting across from her was a man. Not a regular client to quickly service and send away. No, he was lounging back in his chair, his eyes on her like she was something much more than just a hairdresser. Christian's heart tightened. He could have barged in, asked what was going on, forced her to explain, but he didn't. Instead, he retreated into the shadows, pulled out his phone, and took a photo. He didn't even know why, but something told him it would be important. The next morning, while Katie was in the shower, Christian took her phone for the first time. He wasn't planning on snooping, but then a notification popped up. "I miss you already. When are you staying again?" Christian felt everything around him blur, like he'd fallen into an abyss. He read the message again and again. The sender's name, Victor. His chest burned with something hot and unbearable. But even now, he couldn't act without proof. He had to know the truth. Christian worked as a head chef. His life was organized. Morning shopping, meal prep, evening rush at the restaurant. Coming home, a kiss from Katie, a brief chat, and sleep. They'd been together for 5 years, and it always seemed stable. But now, that stability was slipping away like water through his fingers. At first, the changes were barely noticeable. Katie started spending more time at work, staying late, sometimes even staying over at a friend's. Then Victor appeared. She began talking about him too much. First, as a client, then as someone who impressed her with his character, ambitions, and flair. One day, she even said, "You have no idea how charismatic he is. When he walks into a room, everyone feels his presence." Christian didn't think much of it until now. That night, he remembered the message. "When are you staying again?" He wanted to ask her directly, but he knew she'd either avoid the question or laugh it off like, "Are you seriously checking up on me?" No, he needed to act differently. The next day, he called her at 10 p.m. "Hey," her voice sounded a little sleepy, like she'd just woken up. "Where are you?" "At Victor's. We stayed late, so I decided to stay here." She didn't even try to cover it up. She said it so casually, like it was normal. "I see," he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. But he didn't see. The next few days, he acted like nothing had changed. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want her to suspect that he knew something. But inside, everything was boiling. Then he decided to act. One evening, he pretended he was heading to the restaurant, but instead, he parked outside Victor's house. He sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, watching the lit windows. Katie was somewhere in there, with another man, and she had no idea that her husband was sitting in the dark, waiting. He had to see it for himself, and he saw it. Around midnight, the door to the house opened. Victor stood on the doorstep, and Katie embraced him. Not just in a friendly way. Her hands were around his neck, her body pressed against his, and even from a distance, Christian could see the smile on her face. Then they kissed. This time, Christian didn't step back. He got out of the car and walked straight toward them. Christian could feel his heart pounding in his throat, but his legs moved on their own. He wasn't thinking, weighing words. He was just walking. Victor and Katie were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice him at first. They stood under the lamplight like the main characters in a romantic film until he got close enough to hear her laughter. "So, will you stay the night?" Victor asked, his hand resting on her waist. "You know I need to be careful," Katie said with the same playful smile that Christian hadn't seen in a long time. Blood rushed to his face, and he took the final step. "So, this is how you work late?" Katie jumped back, startled. Her eyes widened, lips parted. But no words came out. Victor tensed as well, but quickly regained his composure. "Oh, Christian, seems like this isn't the best time for a chat." His voice was calm, even a bit condescending. Christian ignored him. He only looked at Katie. "Tell me the truth, Katie. This was all a lie, wasn't it? All these nights, all these stories about work." Katie opened her mouth as if to say something, but Victor gently squeezed her shoulder. "Seems like you should head home, buddy." "I don't think Katie wants to talk right now." That calm tone only made Christian angrier. "Don't call me buddy," he hissed. "You're sleeping with another man's wife, and you have the nerve to tell me what to do?" Victor just smiled, as if it were some kind of game. "She's not your property, Christian, and if you want to talk, maybe we should do it somewhere else." "You're not going anywhere," Katie intervened. Her voice no longer trembled, and she quickly regained her composure. "Let's go home, Christian." "Home?" His voice trembled with anger. "After what I've seen?" "Home," she repeated more firmly, looking at him like nothing had happened. He gritted his teeth. In the last moment, as his fist almost clenched on its own, he realized that any further confrontation would just make him look like a fool. Christian spun around sharply and walked back to the car. He didn't see Victor lean toward her and whisper something. He didn't see Katie briefly nod and fix her hair, like nothing had happened. But he knew this wasn't over. On the way home, his mind was spinning. She hadn't even tried to deny it. She didn't defend herself, didn't make up any stories. She just stood there, silent, waiting for him to accept it. He parked by the house, sitting in the car, staring at the steering wheel. How had this happened? How had he not noticed earlier? Christian thought about everything they'd been through together. Their dinners after work, their trips, even the little things, like how she always liked to add more milk to her coffee than necessary. Were those moments lies? The phone rang. Katie. He didn't want to answer, but eventually he hit accept. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, she said emotionlessly. "Don't hurry." She paused. "Don't make a scene, Christian. We can talk like adults." "Like adults?" He laughed, though there was nothing funny in that laugh. "That sounds ironic, coming from a woman who's lied to me for months." She exhaled. "Just wait for me." He didn't respond, just hung up. The door opened exactly 20 minutes later, just as she'd said. Katie stepped inside as if nothing had happened, threw her bag on the chair, and looked at him. "Do you want to talk?" she asked calmly. "You should be the one talking." She shrugged. "All right. Yes, I'm sleeping with Victor. Yes, I enjoy being with him. But that doesn't mean I want to destroy our marriage." His eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. We've had good years together, Christian. But people change. I want things to be like they used to be for us. Just, now it'll be a little different." He almost laughed. "You're asking me to turn a blind eye? I'm asking you to accept the situation. I'm not leaving you. I'm just expanding my boundaries." His chest tightened. "You think I'm going to swallow that?" She stepped closer, her fingers barely touching his hand. "I think you love me enough to accept it." Her voice was soft, gentle, manipulative. And he realized that right now, at this moment, everything was being decided. But before he could respond, she added, "And there's one more thing. I'm pregnant." The world around him seemed to fall apart. Christian felt like the world was disappearing, as though he was falling into a black void. His lungs refused to work, and his heart was pounding so loudly that he could barely hear his own thoughts. Katie stood in front of him, her gaze calm, almost self-satisfied. She waited for his reaction, as if this was something to be discussed over dinner. "What did you say?" His voice was hoarse, as if he had just run several miles without stopping. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, tilting her head slightly, as if studying his reaction. He looked at her, trying to find some hint, some sign that it wasn't true, that she was just joking, that this was some kind of game. But her face remained unmoved. "From me?" Katie didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the window, crossing her arms over her chest, and gazed out at the city at night. "I don't know," she said softly. Everything that had been holding Christian together in that moment shattered. He abruptly stood up, the chair scraping loudly across the floor. "You don't know?" His voice was louder than he intended. Do you even understand what you just said? She turned to him, sighed. Christian, I don't want to argue with you right now. This is a difficult situation for both of us. For both of us? He laughed, but there was nothing funny in that laugh. This is a difficult situation for me. He felt his body begin to tremble with anger. His wife had been cheating on him, lying to him, staying with another man. And now she was pregnant and didn't even know by whom? We can do a test. Katie spoke calmly, almost softly, but her eyes remained cold. Christian didn't know what to say. He wanted to smash something, release the anger, but he didn't want to be the kind of man who lost control. What if it's not my child? He finally asked. She looked at him longer than was needed for an answer. We'll decide what to do when we know for sure. Christian gritted his teeth. Decide? He shook his head as if trying to come to his senses. You think that after all this, I'm just going to sit back and wait for everything to be decided? Katie stepped closer to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. You love me, Christian. Her voice was the same as it had been when she used to talk to him, when she wanted to persuade him to do something he didn't want to agree to. And it would have worked. Before. But now, everything was different. He gently but firmly pushed her hand away. I don't know who I love, Katie. The woman who was my wife? Or the one standing in front of me now? Her face changed for a moment. Oh, please, she muttered, rolling her eyes. Don't play the martyr. Christian shook his head. You don't even realize what you've done. He felt like he couldn't stay in the same room with her anymore. He needed to leave, get some fresh air, think. I need to be alone, he said, grabbing his jacket. And what will that change? She asked, a hint of irritation in her voice. I don't know, but I can't stay here right now. He walked out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Christian wandered through the empty streets of the city aimlessly. The streets were quiet, dim streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. His head was full of thoughts. Christian sat in his car in front of the house, staring at his phone screen. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He was scrolling through messages he had just received from an unknown number. You don't think she'll choose you, do you? His heart skipped a beat. I know you saw us. She has already made her choice. Christian felt anger boiling up inside him. He knew who this was. Victor. He read the message again, as if trying to find some hidden meaning in it. But the meaning was obvious. This man wasn't just trying to take Katie from him. He wanted to humiliate him, crush his dignity, make him back down. And that's when Christian decided. He wouldn't back down. It was almost morning when he returned home. The light in the living room was on, and Katie was sitting on the couch, phone in hand. She looked tired but not shaken. Where have you been? Her voice was calm, as if nothing had happened. Just out, he replied briefly, walking into the kitchen, opening the fridge, and grabbing a bottle of water. This won't change anything, you know that? He turned back to her. What exactly? That you cheated on me? Or that you don't even feel guilty? Katie sighed and ran her hand through her hair. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. You didn't want it? He laughed, but there was no joy in the laugh. You purposely stayed there at night. You lied to me. And now you don't even know who you're pregnant by. She stood up abruptly. And what do you want from me? For me to apologize? To beg you to forgive me? I want the truth, Katie. She looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something like pity. The truth is, I love you both. Those words hit him like a punch to the gut. Are you serious? Yes. Her voice was firm. I'm not going to lie. Victor gives me what you can't give me. And what's that? A sense of freedom. Christian felt like he was being torn apart inside. If you love him so much, why are you still here? She went silent. Because I don't want to destroy our marriage. You've already destroyed it, Katie. She didn't answer, just looked away. Christian suddenly realized he didn't want to talk anymore. He was exhausted. We'll do a paternity test, he said coldly. And if the child isn't mine, it's over between us. Katie pursed her lips but nodded. He walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. This isn't the end. He would find a way to make her regret it. Christian lay in the dark, but sleep wouldn't come. His head was filled with thoughts that wouldn't give him peace. Katie said she loved them both. That was the thing he feared most. Not that she cheated on him. Not that she had been lying to him for months, but that she really might not feel guilty. She didn't even consider it a mistake. For her, it was normal. She wanted both him and Victor, as if it were something natural, as if he was supposed to just accept it, move on, and act like nothing had happened. He replayed in his head every reaction, every expression on her face as she spoke. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't feel remorse. She was confident. Katie had always been like that. She knew how to get what she wanted. She knew how to convince people, how to manipulate. He realized this too late. He turned his head and looked at his phone. He needed to do something, take action, because if he just stayed and waited, it would destroy him. He opened his contacts and dialed a number. The ring seemed to last forever, until someone finally picked up. Hello? The voice was groggy, confused. Hi, Tom. Christian? Damn, man. Do you know what time it is? I know. Sorry, but I need to talk. There was a sigh on the other end, followed by the sound of someone shifting in bed. Are you okay? Something happened? Yeah. I need you to find some information on someone. Information? Are you serious? This doesn't sound like you. I know, but I need it now. Who is it? Victor Longwell. A silence fell. Wait, you mean the businessman? Yeah. Dude, he's not just anyone. If you want to find something on him, it's not going to be easy. Can you do it? Tom was an old friend of his, worked in cybersecurity, and had gotten information people were trying to hide before. Give me some time. All right. Christian hung up the phone and, for the first time in days, felt like he had finally taken control of the situation. He couldn't make Katie choose him. He couldn't change what had happened. But he could ruin Victor. The next morning, Katie acted as if nothing had happened. She woke up, made coffee, changed clothes, and started getting ready for work. She didn't look at him, didn't try to continue the conversation. That drove him crazier than anything else. I talked to Victor, she said, buttoning her blouse. Christian didn't respond, just kept staring at her. I told him we need some time to figure things out. How sweet of him, Christian muttered dryly. Katie sighed and turned to him. We can still fix this. Fix it? Yeah. He couldn't hold it in and laughed. You want us to fix this after you said you love two men? After you don't even know who you're pregnant by? She calmly looked at him. I don't want to lose you. You've already lost me, Katie. Her expression barely changed. She moved closer to him, leaned in, and traced her fingers along his cheek. I'm not sure that's true, she said softly. Her voice was quiet, gentle, the same one she once used to charm him. But now, he saw through her. Get out of my house, Katie. She froze. What? I said, get out. You can't do this. I can. And I am. Her confidence wavered. And what are you going to do? I'll see this through. Katie looked at him, then at her things, then back at him. Fine. If that's what you want. She grabbed her bag and left the apartment. Christian stood in silence, staring at the closed door. He knew this wasn't the end. But now, it was his game. And he was ready. Christian stood by the window, watching Katie leave the apartment, and felt something like satisfaction. For the first time in a long time, he controlled the situation. She thought she could arrange everything her way, but now the rules of the game had changed. He wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for her to decide who was more important to her. His phone buzzed, a message from Tom. Got something interesting. When can we meet? Christian immediately dialed his number. What did you find? He asked, without a greeting. You're not going to like this. His friend's voice was serious. Victor isn't who he says he is. He has a bunch of shell companies, offshore accounts, and it seems he's ruined other people's marriages before. What do you mean? This isn't the first woman he's picked up. I found 2 others who were married and left their husbands for him. One of them suddenly moved away. The other disappeared. Christian gripped the phone. Disappeared? Yeah. No one has seen her in 2 years. The police didn't prove anything, but there are a lot of suspicious details. Is Victor involved? It's not proven, but it looks really suspicious. Christian felt something twist inside him. At first, he just wanted revenge, but now the situation was becoming much more serious. Do you have contact details for those women? Only one. I'll send you her number. The message came almost immediately. He looked at the screen. Alice Gardner. Without hesitation, he pressed the number and waited for someone to pick up. Hello? The woman's voice was cautious. Alice Gardner? Yes, who is this? My name is Christian. We don't know each other, but I think we have a common enemy. His name is Victor Longwell. There was silence on the other end. Then he heard a deep breath. What do you want from me? I just want to know the truth. What did he do to you? Where are you right now? At home. No. Let's meet in person. If you really want to know the truth, I'll tell you everything, but not over the phone. Christian felt his heart race faster. All right. Where? There's a cafe on the outskirts of town, Riverside. I'll be there in an hour. She hung up. Christian glanced at the screen again. He had the feeling he had just taken a step into something far more dangerous than simple betrayal. Christian arrived at the Riverside Cafe 10 minutes before the agreed time. It was a small, cozy place with dim lighting and old wooden tables. There were almost no visitors inside, which suited him. He sat in a corner where he had a clear view of the entrance and ordered a black coffee. He didn't know what to expect. Was Alice just one of the women Victor had used and discarded? Or was there something more to it? What if she was exaggerating? Or worse, what if this was a trap? The door opened, and Christian immediately knew it was her. Tall, with red hair, which she quickly hid under a hood when she entered. She scanned the room, then confidently walked up to him and sat down opposite. Her eyes were alert, her face tired, as if she hadn't slept well for several nights. Are you Christian? Her voice was calm but cold. Yes. She nodded and glanced at the waitress passing by. I'll have tea, please. When the waitress walked away, she crossed her arms over her chest and looked at him intently. So, what do you want to know? Everything. Alice smiled briefly, but there was nothing cheerful in her smile. Everything? All right. I met Victor 3 years ago. At that time, I was married to a wonderful man. We lived an ordinary life, nothing extravagant, but I was happy. And then Victor appeared. He would come to our office because he worked with our management. He was charming, confident, giving me attention that I thought I was lacking. I fell into his trap, like many others. Christian remained silent, listening to her soft, steady voice. At first, everything was like a fairy tale. He took me to expensive restaurants, gave me jewelry, made me feel special. I deceived myself, thinking it was real love, that my husband just didn't understand me the way Victor did. And then I made the biggest mistake of my life. I left my husband for him. Alice clenched her fingers, and Christian saw her nails dig into her skin. Do you know what happened next? A few months after I left everything, he started changing. He became indifferent, cold. At first, I thought it was just his style, that I was imagining problems. And then I realized, he started looking for a new prey. What do you mean? He always does this. He finds a woman who's already in a relationship, charms her, makes her destroy everything for him, and then throws her away. For him, it's a game. He doesn't love. He just wants to destroy. Christian felt something cold tighten inside him. And what happened to you after that? I tried to go back to my husband, but it was too late. He didn't forgive me. I lost everything, and Victor knew that. He didn't care. She looked him straight in the eye. And now your wife is the next victim. Christian gritted his teeth. She's pregnant. Alice wasn't surprised. That's his method. I was pregnant too. Christian widened his eyes. What? Alice pressed her lips together, as if she didn't want to talk about it, but then decided it was pointless to hide anything. I was pregnant. At first, he pretended to be happy, said we'd be a family. And then what? She paused for a long time. I lost the baby. How? Alice stared at him for a few seconds, then slowly said, It wasn't an accident. Christian felt his heart skip a beat. You think Victor? I don't think anything. Her voice grew cold. But after that happened, I wanted to disappear. Otherwise, I'm sure I wouldn't have left on my own. Christian could barely breathe. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want your wife to be the next one. He wanted to respond, but then Alice suddenly changed her expression. We can't sit here any longer. Why? Turn around, but slowly. Christian pretended to stretch for his coffee cup and glanced out of the corner of his eye toward the entrance. He felt his heart tighten. Victor was standing in the doorway, and he was looking directly at them. Christian couldn't look away from Victor, who stood in the cafe doorway, watching them with a cold expression. Time seemed to stop, and Christian's heart began to race. He could leave, abandon Alice, and run, but he couldn't. He wasn't ready to let Victor win so easily. You're following me? Alice calmly looked at Victor, as if she knew this would happen. Victor didn't answer immediately. He calmly walked into the cafe, as if there was nothing strange about being found. He walked toward the table with an elegant step, and Christian couldn't help but notice his confident posture, as if he had already won. You two aren't smart enough to meet in places like this. His voice was cold and threatening. Or did you think I wouldn't find out about this, Christian? Christian didn't answer, just clenched his fingers on the table, trying to stay calm. He could feel the anger boiling inside him, but he didn't want to show weakness in front of Victor. Alice watched them with alertness, her eyes never leaving Victor. You caught me, Christian replied sarcastically, but it seems you have a problem. You forgot about me, Victor. You can manipulate people as much as you want, but I'm no longer the person I used to be. Victor smiled, and there was a cold, calculated gleam in his eyes. Do you think I'm afraid of you? You're just one of many who have fallen into my traps, Christian, and your actions here won't change anything. Victor Longwell always gets away scot-free. Christian paused, trying to understand what exactly his opponent wanted to manipulate him with this time. Something didn't add up. You're that sure? He asked, watching Victor's reaction. Maybe I'll help you? Alice started nervously swallowing, her fingers tightening around the teacup as if she were trying not to reveal her emotions. Christian glanced at her, and in her eyes, he saw some uncertainty. What she had told him about Victor was enough for him to realize that he didn't have the full picture. But could this woman really be telling the truth? Victor, Christian continued, you don't know who you're dealing with. I'm ready to go all the way. You want us to play by your rules, but this time, it's my game. Victor smiled, his gaze full of contempt. You can't beat me, Christian. And even if you try, I'll still get what I want. You know how this works. You want control, but I have more of it. With those words, he turned and left without waiting for a response. His step sounded confident as he exited the cafe, leaving the two opponents in the dark before them. Alice took a deep breath, as if trying to regain a sense of reality. He's right, she said quietly. You won't be able to beat him, Christian. That's not true, he replied, looking her in the eye. I know what I'm doing. Will you help me? Alice looked at him with doubt. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice calm, but there was some unease in it. I'm not sure if you're ready to do this. Christian looked at her, his heart beating faster. You said you want to destroy Victor. You need to know more than just his plans. You can help me find what will make him vulnerable. Alice looked at him, her gaze filled with conflicting feelings. I can't help you recklessly, she said again, but I can tell you something. He doesn't just manipulate women. He takes control of businesses, forces people to come back to him even when they want to escape. He has connections that you won't be able to reach. Christian frowned. What do you mean? He's connected to certain people in business, even politicians. If you want to get the truth out of him, you'll have to go beyond what you know now. Her words were so plausible and yet terrifying that Christian felt his heart tighten. He wasn't just dreaming of destroying Victor. He wanted to control him, bring him to his knees. But now, he realized that it was going to be much harder than he thought. Are you ready for this? Alice asked. Because if you really want to go all the way, you'll have to go even further. And maybe you'll lose everything. He thought about it, but he wasn't sure he could back down. Kathy, she was still part of his life, and he couldn't let her go. But Victor had become far more dangerous than he had imagined. I'm ready, he said, looking at her. We need to know more. Will you help me? Christian felt his heart beating faster again. He hadn't fully realized where this game would lead him, but he knew he couldn't turn back. Victor was too dangerous, and if he didn't act now, he might lose everything. His wife, his dignity, his soul. Alice crossed her arms and looked at him with deep caution, as if trying to weigh all possible consequences. Her eyes were filled with dark waves of doubt, but also with desperate determination. All right, I'll help you, she finally said. But there's one condition. Christian looked at her, feeling something stir in his chest. This wasn't just help. It was something more. I'm listening, he replied. Alice paused, and her gaze turned cold. as if she were no longer here, but somewhere far away, in another world. You can't go alone. I have connections, but they're dangerous. Victor isn't just a player in this game. He's part of a bigger network, and I can't promise that everything will end well if you go after him without support. Christian felt the blood drain from his face. You want me to trust someone else? You? Alice met his gaze without hesitation. I know what you might be thinking, but I'm not just a woman he threw away. I was part of this game, and if you want to win, you'll have to play by new rules. As he asked the question, Christian realized that his ideas about revenge and control had been naive. He had only been exposed to a fraction of what was really happening. Victor was just a pawn on a vast chessboard, and Christian still had no idea what kind of prices he would have to pay if he decided to keep going. They left the cafe in silence, the eyes of the other patrons on them, confused about what had just happened. Alice, as if nothing had occurred, stepped out onto the street, holding her purse. Christian followed her, his mind full of questions, but he felt that the more he asked, the more uncertainty would arise. Where are we going? Christian finally asked. To a man. The one who can help, she replied without turning around. Christian didn't ask any more questions, for his heart was already filled with cold resolve. They walked through the dark streets of the city, each step feeling like a move closer to something big and dangerous. 20 minutes later, they stopped in front of an old, forgotten house on the outskirts of the city. It looked empty and abandoned, but Alice approached the door without hesitation. She opened it, and they stepped into a dark corridor. Who lives here? Christian asked. It doesn't matter. You came here for information, and we will get it, Alice answered, her voice now less calm and more irritated. They reached a door that led to a basement. Alice turned the handle and opened it. The darkness was so thick that Christian couldn't even see his own hand, but he felt that this was not just a place for storage. Something was hidden here. Are you ready to learn the truth? She asked, turning to him. Christian didn't answer. He just nodded. He couldn't afford to doubt, even though his inner voice was warning him that this could be a trap. They descended, and only then did he realize that he had entered the center of the very network that Victor controlled. The basement was huge, with dim light barely illuminating the walls cluttered with various things. But on one of them, Christian noticed a massive photograph that made him stop. It was a picture of Victor, but not alone. There were men in suits, obviously belonging to much more serious people. People he could never have found in his usual life. What is this? He asked, approaching the photo. Alice didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on something in the dark. She slowly nodded and finally said, You don't get it, Christian. Victor is not just a businessman. He's one of the players in a much bigger game, and his destruction is just part of the plan. Do you think he's only deceiving you and your wife? Christian felt the darkness around him grow thicker. The only thought ringing in his head was, this was much more complicated than he had imagined. You're saying Victor? He began, but suddenly, something rustled in the darkness. The sound was so frighteningly familiar that Christian grabbed the table. Something was moving next to him, and then he realized. Victor was already here, and he never left these places just like that. Victor, Alice whispered, her voice so quiet that Christian could barely hear her. It was only then that he realized he had fallen into a trap. Christian stood frozen, his heart pounding in frantic rhythm. The darkness around him thickened, and every move he made echoed with a dull sound in the emptiness of the basement. Victor was here. He was close, and Christian felt cold sweat bead on his forehead. You've fallen into a trap, Christian, he heard the familiar voice, and turning around, he saw Victor standing in the doorway with a smile that looked more like a predatory grin than simple satisfaction. His eyes glowed in the dark, and he was clearly enjoying the moment. Christian clenched his fists, trying not to show fear. Victor took slow steps closer, but his movements were so careful, as if he wanted every move Christian made to be noticed. What are you doing here, Victor? Christian spat out, though the words were meant to be full of anger. They came out weak. I'm just checking if all my prey is ready for the game, Victor replied, grinning mockingly. You've already gotten yourself involved, Christian, and I can see you're starting to understand more and more. Your wife is just a part of this big plan. Christian took a few quick steps forward, wanting to get closer to Victor, and then suddenly another muffled, but strong, gunshot rang out. Alice collapsed to her knees, her face pale and twisted in pain. Victor stood there with a gun in his hands, his eyes coldly fixed on her. "Alice!" Christian shouted, rushing toward her. "Don't come closer," Victor said dryly. "This is just part of your deal, Christian. She was just a tool, and you realized it too late." Christian felt pain squeezing his chest, but he gathered himself and looked at Victor. All of this was starting to get too complicated. "I understand why you're doing this. You want to have all the strings under your control. You think you can manipulate everyone, even me, but I won't be your victim," Christian shouted, his voice filled with more determination than ever. Victor squinted and then slowly lowered the gun, realizing the situation had changed. He tried to smile, but his face showed no happiness, only the feeling that his game was slipping out of his control again. "You still don't understand," Victor whispered. "You can't win. I'm not just a man with a gun. I have more than you can imagine." And then something happened that Christian hadn't expected. A voice came from behind him, one that was familiar, but had never sounded with such meaning before. "Victor, I'm the one who won." Christian turned around and saw Tom. He was standing in the doorway, smiling. On his face wasn't just satisfaction, but the feeling that he had already won, even before the situation reached its climax. "What do you mean?" Victor asked, his tone shifting from a smile to anger. "I've found everything I needed. You're not just a player, Victor. You're part of a larger operation, but I know how to stop you," Tom replied. "You have connections, you manipulate people, but you didn't take into account that I've been following you for a long time." Tom pulled out a tablet from his pocket and showed Victor several images. They were photos, documents, and recordings that proved Victor's criminal schemes. Victor, although he tried to maintain his composure, was visibly shaken. He began to step back as if trying to flee, but every step he took was irrevocably recorded. "We've won," Tom said, looking at Christian. Christian didn't respond, but his gaze showed a new understanding. Everything he had gone through, everything he had thought about his struggle, it now made sense. Victor was just a small part of a huge game he had gotten caught in. Now they knew the truth, and that was the end for Victor. The doors swung open, and several men in black suits entered the room. Victor, with no other way out, was quickly subdued and led out of the basement. Alice, although badly hurt, was sitting on the floor, breathing heavily, but alive. Christian rushed to her and helped her stand. "We're not done yet," he said quietly, looking into the darkness. "Now we have a chance to stop them all." But in his heart, there was a feeling that this story was not entirely finished. Do you think Victor was really just a part of larger manipulations? Or did he himself become the victim of someone even more powerful in this story?